Hi, my name's Talina, and Law and Social Theory is my favourite course of all time.
So legal theory was really about unpacking this sort of idea of what is the law.
Looking at something and then asking questions.
We discuss why the law it is the way it is.
And how does it function? And what are the influences on the law?
We concentrated more on the theorists and the concepts and the ideas.
Original philosophical texts.
Making connections that most people normally wouldn't make.
Is it any good? Can we make it better? Is there a better system?
Sometimes doctrinal law can give you that, but often it doesn't kind of hone those really important critical skills. And if you want to be a really good lawyer, particularly if you want to be a barrister where you have to learn to put your client's case into forms of argument, then it's more useful to have a critical perspective.
For me, theory enables you to sort of work on multiple scales so you can think about what's happening at the level of practice and at the level of the daily, and then kind of sort of zoom out or aggregate up to think about a bigger picture and bigger patterns, bigger structures. So I think for me, theory is about that sort of going between the daily and kind of bigger ideas.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think legal theory differs from the other law courses that you've done?
When I started considering and thinking about theory, it almost made me realise, or it did make me realise, that there were almost two institutions in tandem. That this one system I'd been working within was quite a structured, formal system, and theory was, it felt like, unlimited. You know, it was boundless.
Law and social theory offers you theory to apply to almost anything, any issue that you want, anything that you're interested in. And
I would say that not only has it helped me in the courses that have actually come after it and during it, but it also made me rethink a lot of the content that I already learnt.
I really realise in some ways how limited thinking in a really doctrinal way can be for the world's problems that we face today, because if we're working in systems that already pre-exist, how can we expect them to expand and incorporate new ideas?
If you want to be a critical practitioner in whatever you're doing and you want to be able to think structurally and think analytically, then I think theory helps you to do that. So if you're working in the migration sector, for me, how can you do that work without thinking about borders, without thinking about the formation of the nation state, without thinking of the construction of citizenship, or the way that mobility is racialized? You know, I think you can't separate those things. And I think the same with law. You know, how can we not think about theories of justice or state power or policing or governance or ethics? You know, for me, these are theoretical questions. So I think it's a part of practice. It's a part of being a critical practitioner in whatever you decide to do.
Did you have any assumptions about theory or about philosophy before you started the course, and did those change?
Yes, I did have an assumption before starting the legal theories course, because you tend to think that theory is really dry.
They definitely changed. Like at the start of the unit, I was very much thought that theory was something that was high in the ivory tower and not something that was going to be of any application in the real world. And I think that the further I got into the course, the more I realised I was wrong at the beginning of the course, which is, you know, a really nice thing to have that moment.
One of the key assumptions that I had about philosophy, or a lot of people have about philosophy, is that it's really esoteric or somehow pointless in some way, or that it's really difficult to read, or philosophers talk in riddles and they don't make sense.
It will really deepen my ability to critique and understand not only the law but the policies.
And what did you find was the most challenging part of the course?
So I think the most challenging part of any kind of theory course, but particularly legal theory for me, was how to bridge the doctrine that I'd learnt at law school, so the rules and how to answer an exam question, with thinking about things in a theoretical, kind of normatively driven way. So I always saw them as running in parallel together for a long time, and it was really hard for me to bridge how I can use theory with the doctrine that I know. So I think the most difficult thing for me was reconciling how to bring the two together and how to marry the ideas so that we can push this one idea further in itself. The moment I did realise how they came together or can come together, it really enhanced my understanding of both the theory and the doctrines.
One of the greatest favours that you can do to yourself is to pick a topic that you are actually really interested in.
By the end of it, you kind of get used to it, and you know, because you've got that knowledge behind you from weeks, like the earlier weeks, and you tend to understand your readings a little bit more than you used to.
Try to find the theorist or theories that you resonate the most as a person.
The language of a certain theorist can be really poetic and really accessible.
It's quite exciting when you come across a new idea and you really feel invested in that. And when it works in tandem, it's pretty cool.
Why do you think it's important to study theory?
We never really get the opportunity to ask the question, is our legal system any good? I found the unit that we did on punishment in legal theory particularly interesting.
Say if you're working with Indigenous people, if you don't actually understand like Indigenous scholarship around colonisation, if you don't understand issues around gender incarceration, the prison industrial complex, all those kind of things, and you're not going to actually understand what the needs of your clients might be.
You know, aside from what we study in criminal law about sentencing practices and the purposes of sentencing, how do we actually justify our sentencing legislation, and why do we feel the way that we do about punishment?
When I was doing policing law, for example, I had a young client who was in Walgett. And I read the first line so this client, I should just say, was charged with assault police and offensive language. And when I read the first line of the brief that I'd been given, I already knew what the police were going to write, because it's a discourse and it's a script. It's already something that exists beyond individuals. It's part of the colonial context.
A theorist called Collingwood, who was born in the late 19th century and wrote in the earliest 20th century, who first came up with the idea that actually punishment or punishment for crime or sanction is not really a moral action, it's a political action. It's not that somebody deserves the punishment that we inflict on them necessarily, it's that we have to punish in order to maintain a particular order or a particular political order so that society can continue to function.
This is a town that was so over-policed, and that what was happening to my client was happening to a number of other people. So it also meant just not even considering just individual justice, but actually what's systemic, like on the wider structural level that we could do, which included talking to the Walgett police, for example, to try and actually to say you've got a discrimination and racism problem here.
And it sort of makes you think about sentencing and its validity in a totally different way. And Collingwood wasn't the only theorist that we discussed, but I found that to be an absolutely fascinating topic.
This is part of why we come to these institutions, is to be able to access this kind of knowledge and to take our time with it.
University is meant to be this light bulb moment where something cracks in your brain and you're like, I've never thought about this before, or something you take for granted suddenly is really exotic, or you never, completely different to what you expected. And that's what legal theory gives you. That's what theory gives you. You're not going to get that in your normal doctrinal courses.